Welcome to EPG Pathshala. In this module, we will be giving you a broad overview of history of American literature from 1900 to 1950. I'm Niladri Chatterjee, Professor, Department of English, University of Kalyani, West Bengal. What we will be examining in this module is going to be literature, but also we are going to look into the happenings of the times. We are going to look at scientific developments. We are going to look at the changes in the human psyche. We are going to look at the ways in which relationships begin to be represented. There will be remarkable changes as far as America's economy is concerned. We are going to also look at the way in which American power gradually evolves into a world power. So these particular 50 years are going to be rather remarkable because we are going to see the way in which America gradually becomes a world power. We are going to see the rise of America's economic power and therefore political power. And something that we must remember while we discuss this particular module is that while Europe was impoverished and reduced to virtual penury by the two world wars, what happened to America was something completely different. So America actually benefited enormously from the war. So these are the two world wars that are going to be central to our understanding of what American society and American literature becomes between 1900 and 1950. Moving on, we are going to therefore see that at the beginning of the 20th century, American novelists were expanding fiction's social spectrum to encompass both high and low life and sometimes connected with the naturalist school of realism. More directly, political writings discussed social issues and powers of corporations, by which I mean business corporations. Some, like Edward Bellamy, in looking backward, outlined other possible political and social frameworks. Upton Sinclair, most famous for his meatpacking novel The Jungle, advocated socialism. Henry Adams's literary autobiography, The Education of Henry Adams, also depicted a stinging description of the education system and modern life. Experimentation in style and form soon joined the new fiction, new freedom in subject matter. And I think Edward Bellamy, Upton Sinclair, Henry Adams are some of the American writers that you could think of who also expressed the certain disillusionment which followed upon the war. Now, before I continue any further, I think I would want you to remember that here also something rather important begins to happen. You have a gradual consolidation of the left wing of America during this time. So you have a lot of progressive political movements. There are people who ostensibly and very sincerely also regard themselves as being of the left, of the political left, and they definitely produced fiction that was in alignment with their political beliefs. We are definitely going to be concerned with F. Scott Fitzgerald. Nobody has been able to document the 1920s, popularly known as the Jazz Age, more than him. Scott Fitzgerald very often wrote about the flappers. We are going to look at the way in which the flapper was basically a young woman who was pleasure-seeking. She was wealthy, she was prosperous, she was out for a good time. And 1920s, therefore, becomes a time when women are, given a kind of liberation. Women feel liberated in the way in which they had not done in the previous decade. So there is a clear distinction between the way in which women behaved or women were expected to behave before the First World War and the way in which women were allowed to behave after the First World War. So there's a drastic change that happens before and after the First World War. Scott Fitzgerald's characteristic themes, rather expressed poignantly in The Great Gatsby, include the tendency of youth's golden dreams to dissolve in failure and disappointment. Depression-era literature was blunt and direct in its social realism. John Steinbeck is perhaps somebody that I would certainly want to mention. Steinbeck's style was simple and evocative, winning him the favor of the readers, but not necessarily of the critics. But of course, there is The Grapes of Wrath, considered to be his masterpiece. This is a very strong, socially oriented novel that tells the story of the Joads, a poor family from Oklahoma, and their journey to California in search of a better life. I would want to dwell a little bit on John Steinbeck right now, because what John Steinbeck is doing very much is he is representing the Depression era in almost the same way that F. Scott Fitzgerald had represented the Jazz era. If you are expected to name one novelist of the 1920s, most often people name F. Scott Fitzgerald. If you're asked to name one novelist of the 1930s, most people name John Steinbeck. So we are looking at the way in which particular writers tend to be regarded as being somehow representative of that particular decade. Now, what we really need to understand is exactly what were the things that the writers were affected by. As I have told you before, that this particular period, this 50-year period from 1900 to 1950, is marked by the presence of two devastating world wars. You have the First World War and you have the Second World War. Now, you have to remember that in the First World War as well as in the Second World War, compared to the devastation that was visited on Europe, America was to a much lesser extent affected. American troops were certainly sent abroad to serve, but no actual fighting happened on American soil, apart from the bombing of Pearl Harbor, which happened during the Second World War. There was also the presence of communism. America, you must understand, was something of a communist-hating country, and there was almost a concerted effort on the part of the state to ensure that communism does not reach the shores of America. And this anti-communist bias in the American consciousness is something which, by the time we come to the 1950s, is going to have a disastrous consequence, because of course we are going to be witnessing what is called the McCarthy witch hunt, which basically was a system by which Joseph McCarthy, who was a senator, he instituted a committee, the committee that investigated the un-American activities. By un-American activities, what they basically meant was that if you supported communism or if you belonged to a communist party, then you would be declared un-American. So there was a fear of communism that was there at the state level, but this is also the time when a lot of writers, a lot of intellectuals openly begin to espouse communist ideology. This also is about the beginning of the Cold War. Let me tell you a little bit about the Cold War. This is the Cold War that starts after the end of the Second World War. So when the Second World War ends in 1945, something rather strange happens. The powers that had actually united to defeat Hitler, that is to say America, the US, America, the United Kingdom, Russia, these countries, what happens is that a kind of an iron curtain descends between them. So on the one hand, you've got Russia, and on the other hand, you've got America, and you've got the United Kingdom. So the Cold War that we talk about is the Cold War basically between capitalist countries and communist countries. Capitalists on one side, communists on the other. And this Cold War is manifested most profoundly towards the end of the 1940s, but definitely to a very large extent in the 1950s, when in America there is a rabid fear of communism, and similarly in the communist world there is a rabid fear of capitalism. So both sides of this Cold War divide, the Eastern Europe, as it were, and Western Europe, they both are engaged in a relationship of mutual hatred, mutual suspicion, mutual antagonism. This is also marked by a marked increase in population. This particular period, that is to say the period that immediately comes after the Second World War, is known as the period where you have a lot of children being born in America, and they are called the baby boomers. So therefore the baby boomers are those people who were born in the late 1940s. These were the babies who were born after the American troops returned from fighting elsewhere across the world. So the baby boomers are a generation of people who came into their 20s in the 1960s. There, of course, also remain lingering racial tensions after slavery and after Reconstruction. There are tremendous technological advances. America becomes technologically advanced. There is a rise of the youth culture, and there is also a fear of eroding traditions. So there are people who are worried about the disappearance of the old ways of life, but of course this is something which cannot be helped. So there are people who bemoan the fact that the old ways of life have disappeared and that there are certain new ways of life that have come into existence as a result of the rapid advancement of technology. Now, what are the things that the modern writers are known for? Well, they are known for themes of alienation, of disconnectedness, frequent use of irony and understatement, experimentation with new literary techniques in fiction and in poetry. So you've got stream of consciousness technique. This is, of course, something that we have already been discussing. There are people like Henry James that you could talk about, who use the stream of consciousness technique. There are writers who are using the interior dialogue, interior monologue, in fact, to be very precise, fragments. They are trying to create a unique style. There is, of course, a rise in ethnic and women's writing. Now, the important writers of this time would be William Faulkner, Ernest Hemingway, Sherwood Anderson. William Faulkner, of course, would be the author of The Sound and the Fury, As I Lay Dying, Light in August, The Hamlet. And the Ernest Hemingway's novels are going to be The Sun Also Rises, A Farewell to Arms, To Have and to Have Not, For Whom the Bell Tolls, and of course Old Man and the Sea, which is there in your syllabus. Sherwood Anderson, a very prolific writer. He wrote Windy McPherson's Son, Marching Men, Poor White, Many Marriages, Dark Laughter, Tar, A Midwest Childhood, which was a semi-autobiographical novel, Alice and the Lost Novel, and Beyond Desire. I have already talked about F. Scott Fitzgerald, but you should know about some of his other novels. We have The Great Gatsby in your syllabus, which you will be reading. But apart from Great Gatsby, he also wrote This Side of Paradise, The Beautiful and the Damned, Tender is the Night, and The Last Tycoon. John Steinbeck, again somebody that I've already talked about in a way in which he is sort of iconic as a writer, because nobody writes about the Depression period, which was there in the 1930s in America, with greater authority than John Steinbeck. Claude McKay is another one who also wrote Home to Harlem, Banjo, and Banana Bottom. We have to also talk about the playwrights. And over here, you are going to read plays by all of the playwrights that are going to be mentioned in this particular section. Eugene O'Neill, who is famous for various plays of his, Long Day's Journey into Night, Anna Christie, Strange Interlude. You've got Tennessee Williams, A Streetcar Named Desire, Summer and Smoke, The Rose Tattoo, Spring Storm, Suddenly Last Summer. So Tennessee Williams, Eugene O'Neill, and along with them Arthur Miller, who is famous for Death of a Salesman, who is known for All My Sons. These were the writers who were looking both inward and outward. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that these writers, some of them were extremely politically engaged, so that meant a look outward because they were looking at society. But there were other dramatists who were also looking inward, in the sense that they were extremely interested in delving into the consciousness, into the psychology of the characters, into the psychology of people. So you have both directions in which theatre is traveling at this time. As far as poetry is concerned, Robert Frost, Langston Hughes, along with E. E. Cummings, and you already have E. E. Cummings in your syllabus, so you will be reading many of his poems. But Robert Frost and Langston Hughes are the two names that I think I would want to talk more about. Robert Frost is clearly regarded as one of the most important poets of the 20th century. He is of great national importance. Many of you may be familiar with his poem, The Path Not Taken, or The Path Less Traveled. You are also going to be familiar with Langston Hughes. But for those of you who are unfamiliar with Langston Hughes, let me tell you a little bit about him. Langston Hughes was an African-American poet. He is widely regarded as belonging to that period of American literature which is called the Harlem Renaissance. Now, the Harlem Renaissance is that period of poetry where you have, or indeed poetry and music and theatre and fiction, which broadly came out of this area of New York which is called Harlem. Harlem has always been predominantly populated, predominantly lived in by the African Americans. So when we talk about the Harlem Renaissance, what we are really talking about is this huge upsurge of writing, this absolute the sort of blossoming of writing from the African American community. Langston Hughes wrote The Weary Blues, Fine Clothes to the Jew, The Negro Mother and Other Dramatic Recitations, Dear Lovely Death. Langston Hughes occupies a very, very important place in the history of African American literature, because with his poetry, he held out a promise of the way in which one could write poetry in English, but one could write poetry in such a way that perhaps that English can be rendered amenable, or it can be rendered suitable for the conveying of the African American consciousness. So therefore, what Langston Hughes was trying to do was he was trying to push the boundaries of the English language in such a way that certain very important, almost race-specific emotions and passions could be expressed. We also have a lot of short story writers. William Faulkner, of course, he wrote short stories too. Dorothy Parker, I think, absolutely needs to be mentioned, because Dorothy Parker, you have to keep in mind that she is one of the great comic writers of American literature. She is well known for her sayings, for her quips, for her witticisms. She is a truly wonderful writer as far as a comic genius is concerned. So if you're looking at a tradition of American comic writing, if you're looking at a tradition of American wit, then I think Dorothy Parker would be a very important person whose work you can look into. Apart from that, there is, of course, William Saroyan. I would want to refer to Inhale and Exhale, Love, Little Children, Saroyan's Fables, The Human Comedy, and Getaway Old Man. So we are looking at an absolute explosion of various kinds of writing that happens during this time. As far as certain very important women writers are concerned, I have already mentioned Dorothy Parker, of course, but then there are certain writers that I think I need to talk about rather specifically. And over here, I would want to mention most importantly Zora Neale Hurston. Zora Neale Hurston's novel, Their Eyes Were Watching God, is a rather remarkable book, because with this book, you also have the coexistence, as it were, of something that can be called feminist writing, but also there is a very clear acknowledgement of the question of race. As far as poetry is concerned, we have the very important contribution to American literature and American poetry in particular by Hilda Doolittle, who popularly goes by the abbreviation of HD. Hilda Doolittle also contributes to a very large extent to American poetry at this time, and many of her poems can also be read for their feminist content. So, what are the major themes in the writings of the people who are working between 1900 and 1950? There is a re-engagement with American history. There is also a very, very powerful attempt being made by various writers to try and see how one can juxtapose illusion against reality. I would again want you to refer to The Great Gatsby, which is one of those many novels in which there is an attempt that is made to understand that what we imagine the American dream to be is perhaps not as glorious as what eventually comes to pass. There is a determined understanding of the way in which money functions in American society, the way in which wealth functions in American society. And the investigation into this is also definitely fueled by our understanding of the rise of American political consciousness, especially the rise in communist ideology. There is an attempt at understanding youth, maturity, beauty. These are also very important markers in American literature. But also with it, there are certainly ways in which Americans try to look at the ideas of loneliness, what exactly the marriage is, what exactly is a family. We have a gradual consciousness, which is a revival from the transcendentalist period, of the way in which there needs to be a certain engagement with the environment. And there is also certainly an engagement with what the Cold War has done to the American consciousness. There are greater representations of racial and sexual identities. One of the most important group of writers is the group of writers that is popularly known as the Lost Generation. Now, in some of your other modules, you will have come across frequent references to the French capital, Paris. Paris occupies a very important position in American literature. We have seen it, for example, in the novels of Henry James. We have seen it in the novels of James Baldwin. We are going to also see it in the novels and the fictional works of many other writers. And it was in Paris that a group of American writers went and lived in, and this was happening roughly in the 1920s. This was happening after the First World War. Now, here were people who were actually living in Paris, they were working in Paris, they were reading French literature. And I would certainly want to mention over here not only Ernest Hemingway, who becomes a very important part of it, but there were other American writers who were living in Paris as expatriates. And over here, perhaps the most important writer that I could mention, and she was also perhaps presiding over the Society of Expatriate Americans in Paris, somebody called Gertrude Stein. I think Gertrude Stein's poetry should be read, Gertrude Stein's writing should be read if you are to truly understand exactly what it was like, to be reading the work of those people, those expatriate Americans who were living in Paris and working at that time. I would certainly want to mention another group of writers over here, and they were the beat writers. Now let us try and understand exactly where does the word beat come from. But before I talk about where does the word beat come from, I would perhaps want to go back a little bit and talk about why the lost generation were called the lost generation. They were called the lost generation because it was felt as though they were lost to America, in the sense that they had gone away from America. So here were people who were actually exploring their identities away from their nation and trying to understand what that would mean. Beat. Now, there are several theories as to where the term beat comes from, but perhaps the one that circulates the most is that beat is actually a short form of the word beatific. Beatific means a state of almost divine bliss. When you sort of experience a kind of a holy spiritual state of upliftment. Beatific. So beatific is perhaps regarded as leading to the term beat. Now, who were the beat writers and what were they writing about? Now, the beat writers, as you can imagine, they were writing primarily in the sort of late 1950s, early 1960s, and going all the way through the 1960s. They were very, very sort of iconoclastic. They were against traditional ways of looking at identity, traditional ways of looking at America. They were extremely anti-establishment. They were not necessarily anti-intellectual because there was an enormous amount of intellectual content to what they wrote, but there were certainly sort of pretensions that they were critiquing as to exactly what was an intellectual's duty in society. So when we look at beat writers, we are looking at these people who have positioned themselves, as it were, in the margins of society. Here are people who are, for example, protesting against the militarization of America. Here are the people who are protesting against nuclear weapons. Here are people who are protesting against the Vietnam War. Here are people who are protesting against the Korean War. So therefore, these are anti-war activists. These are people who want a closer relationship with nature. These are also people who are deeply anti-patriarchal. So therefore, they are also there to interrogate and question. They are there to interrogate and question certain patriarchal notions. And they basically want to create a society which is as equal as possible. Of course, most important among the beat writers would be Allen Ginsberg and his very long poem, Howl, but there are others as well. So therefore, there is Lawrence Ferlinghetti, there is William Burroughs, and of course, there is Jack Kerouac's travel narrative, On the Road. On the Road, you must understand, is a very, very important the piece of work. It is non-fictional. It's a very important piece of work because what it does is that On the Road, in a very important way, manages to accomplish something which is very important to American writing, which is an acknowledgement of the vast open spaces. Remember that much of American identity springs from the awareness that this is an enormous country. It is a huge geographical response. So the travel narrative is something that becomes a very important genre as far as American literature is concerned, because roads are a very important part of the American consciousness, just as cars are a very important part of American consciousness. So therefore, roads and cars and traveling from point A to point B, and these are very long distances that people have to travel, they create the American consciousness, which is of great importance. When we come to the Great Depression, we realize that we are talking about a time when the economy of America has collapsed. You must understand that the economy of America, which was enjoying such a wonderful time during the 1920s, as I told you, when there was endless fun, endless music, endless partying. It was almost as though the United States of America had a party for 10 years. And this party for 10 years, roughly from 1919 to 1929, ended rather abruptly in the end of the 1920s with the stock market crash. Now, the moment the stock market crash happened, what really happened was that a lot of businesses closed down, a lot of companies closed down, and as a result of it, there was massive unemployment. There were people who had immediately lost their jobs. There were people who were begging for food on the streets. There were long queues of people who were going hungry, and these images of America being reduced to begging on the streets was something that was rather zealously seized upon by the Soviet Union, and these images of starving, poor, begging Americans were shown to people in Russia, for example, and across the Soviet Union to tell them that, look, This is what capitalism does to you. Under capitalism, you have beggars. But look at us. We are communists. We are also happy. So therefore, this Great Depression also contributed towards the further consolidation of the Cold War, because people in Russia, in Soviet Russia, were using the Great Depression for their communist propaganda, and just as the capitalist world had consistently used horrific narratives, very correct narratives that were coming out of the Soviet Union for their own propaganda. Now, the Great Depression, if we can go further, if we can continue the discussion of the Great Depression, we will find that we have several writers of this time. Eugene O'Neill is somebody that I have already mentioned, and we have also mentioned John Steinbeck. So you have to pay attention to these writers to try and understand exactly what is going on. Harlem Renaissance is something that I have already spoken about in the context of Langston Hughes, but there were others who were writing at this time as well. So this is a very important movement in the history of American literature, and that is something that we should never lose sight of. Among the people who were writing as a part of the Harlem Renaissance, I've already mentioned Zora Neale Hurston, I've already mentioned Langston Hughes, but there are some other people that I think you should keep in mind, and Countee Cullen, Arna Bontemps, Helene Johnson, James Weldon Johnson. These are some of the people that you should keep in mind. Now, in order to conclude, I would therefore say that this period between 1900 to 1950s is of tremendous importance, because this is a time when America changes rather profoundly. America is involved in 2 world wars, and as a result of its involvement in the 2 world wars, in a rather astonishing way, America becomes a very, very important world power. There are tremendous technological advances. There are tremendous advances also as far as the evolution of society is concerned. You must understand that it is in the 1920s that women in America get the vote. So there is a greater freedom. There are greater rights that are given to American women than they had before the First World War. But however, as we come to the end of this module, please remember that this is also the time when we are going to gradually witness, by the time we come to the 1950s, we are going to gradually witness a sudden retrenchment, in the sense that women are going to be robbed of their freedom, women are going to be robbed of their political power in a very important way, because women are going to be then encouraged to go back into the kitchen, to go back into the household, and to withdraw from public life. That will create conditions which are going to become so intolerable that there is going to be a protest against it, which is why we are going to see an absolute explosion of the feminist movement in protest of the way in which American women are disempowered, as it were, in the 1950s. And that is, those are the things that you have to keep in mind when you study the literature from the 1900s to 1950s. Thank you.